Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here. I hope you've had a wonderful FinOps X so far. So I'm Natalie from HSBC, and welcome to our FinOps AI recap panel. So we've had a number of AI sessions over the past few days, and the plan for this session was to bring all of what we've discussed together and hopefully impart with you all some top tips and some insights into how we can manage our AI journeys moving forward. So we've got three of our AI experts with us, our FinOps AI experts, and I'd let them introduce themselves.
Hi, Brent Eubanks. I'm the FinOps architect at Wayfair. I sit in strategic operations and finance to oversee all the investments of the tech org, including the cloud spend. And I'm leading the AI working group for AI for FinOps.
And I'm a FinOps engineer for Grammarly, but the first FinOps engineer for Grammarly, so really I'm in charge of the FinOps strategy across the board. And I'm also part of the AI working group that Brent leads.
Hey, I'm James. I'm also part of the AI working group. We just published our second paper from the second sprint. We hope you get a chance to read it. But I help lead global AI enablement for MetLife. So it's FinOps adjacent. I'm part of the overall global platforms team, which includes a FinOps capability. And so as we're rolling out AI capabilities, obviously these things get expensive, and so we need to start optimizing and figuring out, how to best serve these workloads. And so that's kind of why I'm here. So, hello.
Thank you. Right, so let's get straight into it. So we thought we'd level set the room, really. We've been talking quite a bit over the past few days about sometimes there's some confusion between FinOps for AI or AI for FinOps. So why don't we start by clarifying what we think the difference is between the two? And I'd like to firstly ask James to ask that question, please.
Sure. Yeah, it is a little confusing because they're very similar, and almost all AI, right, happens in the public cloud. It's really difficult to run your own clusters, and so there's a lot of overlap. And so FinOps for AI is really talking about how do you take an AI workload and optimize it such that you're getting the best bang for your buck when interfacing with these models. You don't want to necessarily use the biggest, best model for the simplest use case, right? There's trade-offs in terms of performance, there's trade-offs in terms of cost, accuracy, and all of these trade-offs can play together to give you the best model or the best capability for a particular use case. And so being able to evaluate the models and understand which ones are particularly good at certain aspects while also being cheap is what FinOps for AI is. And then AI for FinOps is kind of how do you multiply the capabilities that us as practitioners of FinOps have without needing to, hire a whole 100-person team to send out a bunch of emails. If you can have AI agents send out emails on your behalf to all of your application teams, you get that force multiplier from the new technology. So that's really those are the main differences. You can have AI for FinOps, and while you're doing that, right, you need to also optimize, and that's FinOps for AI as well. So there's a lot of interplay. It can get really complicated, and we can dive into the weeds later, but that's basically.
Great, thank you, James. Anything else anyone would like to add to that?
One thing I'd like to add there is just the maturity between the two right now. I think FinOps for AI is further along as it should be because you've got to figure out what you need tools to do. So in the space of FinOps for AI, more mature, and then when you look at AI for FinOps, there's a ton of opportunity there, but we're still quite early to see the benefits of that.
Great, thank you. Okay, so moving on, putting yourselves in the shoes of FinOps practitioners, where should a FinOps practitioner start? We're all seeing our organizations invest more in AI. So how can a FinOps practitioner help the business articulate the value of their AI adoption journey? And Brent, I'd like to invite you to answer that first.
Great, thank you. So when you go to start, I believe the first myth to dispel is make sure that you're understanding the basics of the technology. So when we have these large language models, it's words, and it's very contextually relevant of the next word. What we're doing in our FinOps is we're trying to say, use your data lake or your BI tool. They're adding AI on top of that. And so there's models from like Databricks or Snowflake or like Gemini, Looker, BigQuery. And so we're already trusted with that data in our FinOps. And so as you're starting, being able to understand, is it like a plugin for Excel or Google Sheets? You know, you'll see the limitations of it. So you should learn it, know what it cannot do today, and then don't try to have a language model. It's kind of like having a fish try to climb a tree, right? You can't force a language model to do good math. So that's what some of the frustration and confusion you're feeling now is people are trying to submit a big CSV file into a chat window and say, join this column or do an anomaly analysis and calculate these things. It's not going to do it, but we're quickly starting to understand, look to your BI tools or your other data analytics, and then that will give you answers. And so a lot of us, we build charts for data interchange or question answer across the business. We're now getting charts from chat. And so that was a lot of what we staff for, is we have to staff the team to build the SQL, to build the data, to then present it in our dashboard. So that's what I would suggest you guys do. Start playing with it, learn the limits, and try to focus on, is it a data user story or is it a language user story?
Thanks, Brent. Okay, so moving on. So one of the common themes that's come out from feedback and questions in the sessions is also the difficulty around forecasting for generative AI spend. So Josh, what top tips do you have for forecasting? Where are we in the journey of maturity with forecasting? And any insights you could offer for the practitioners, please.
Thank you for the easiest question. I'll say that at this moment in time, the way companies are willing to spend in Gen AI, especially right now, I think forecasting is lower your expectations for accuracy compared to maybe other cloud forecasts. Be willing to just accept large differences, because it's just very hard to plan when everybody's trying to innovate and create new products. That being said, some learnings I've kind of gleaned over my time is these models are out for about a year. Then they're deprecated. You need to work into your costs transitioning to a new model, because if the timing's not right there, especially with these Gen AI platforms, API platforms that you have provision capacity, you got to time that correctly, or you're going to be double paying for capacity, which is going to increase costs. So planning around those deprecations and modeling your forecast with at least those things in mind help. But overall, lower your expectations with these forecasts for at least the next year or so. And I'm sure by then we'll hopefully be in a better place to forecast these.
Yeah, I would say that earlier today in your talk, you also mentioned how the cost model for these AI workloads are currently very much like the old data center kind of way of cost forecasting, in that you need to be able to, or if it's your business's ideal risk tolerance, to be able to accept and handle those spikes, you need to be able to provision up to that max throughput. And so it's very different than some of the most mature cloud products right now, in that you can scale with demand and come and go. But with the various pricing strategies or availability strategies that the generative AI endpoints have, you'll run into issues if you try to just do on-demand pricing, and you'll pay a lot of money if you just want to do the full provisioned, right? And so being able to buy a certain amount and kind of craft your application to move to various on-demand capabilities is a really crucial aspect to being able to keep costs under control.
Yeah, and to that point, I will add that with the provision capacity piece with these API platforms, it's anti-cloud to me. You're having to plan according to the expected peak usage, which you have low utilization, but you're also, if you don't have enough for your production usage, you're going to have an outage, unless you have other things in place to kind of keep that from happening. So there's other costs outside of money involved in this. And I think this is going to fall into most FinOps practitioners' scope. So yeah, you have to plan for that peak and make sure that the application is going to remain stable, but at the same time, try to figure out over time how that forecast is going to be, even planning for that peak usage.
Great, thank you. So that, I think, leads us on quite neatly to the next question around optimization. So what techniques are out there? What tried and tested methodologies, and what advice would you give to the FinOps practitioners around, starting to optimize spend, starting to advise their organizations on where to look and how to approach their optimization journey for AI? And can we start with Brent on that one?
I don't know if we have a slide on there or not for the graphic. So if we know what the cost drivers are, they're going to initiate a cost when they make this engineering choice, or the user is going to consume the service. Every one of these has a optimization. And FinOps to me means we're here to help educate, advise, consult on how to use and buy that service better. As we mentioned earlier, AI is just another service, right? The cloud providers offer it. A SaaS vendor offers it. So when we look at each of these, we understand the easy known costs. There's one-time non-recurring engineering, like fine-tuning, training, indexing, initial embeddings of the data. And then you've got your servicing costs, and that scales with adoption, right? So it's pretty easy to plot if we're going to go to 10 million users, it costs this much per user, that's pretty easy. But then there's the hidden costs, and this comes into like all the other perimeter services of compliance, resiliency, logging, monitoring, stuff like that. So if we go to the next slide, when we talk about optimization, there's application level things that we can do like at the AI level. So imagine if we get billed on how many words you send in and then how many words come out. So if you put in a compression algorithm that takes from 1 million words and it brings it down to 200,000 on the input, great, you didn't do anything yet to the model. You just compress the text. And so there's scripts or something for that layer. And then on the infrastructure layer, Josh mentioned he just changed the machine type. Or will your team use CPU inferencing that you already have spend commits for? And you don't have to worry about the GPU bottleneck, right? So if your engineers, and let's say it's an internal Slack bot or an internal code copilot. It doesn't have to be zippy. It can have a 7-second delay. Well, maybe they can use CPU inferencing for that, right? And so what we're saying here is when we have a quality threshold, if you know what that quality threshold is where the model or approach is good enough, that's what we're seeing all the innovation. So the quality of these free or open source models, they can achieve the same result that required a very expensive model last year. So what we're saying in this option 3 is saying, hey, if we have an 80% quality, anything above that, it's good enough. And now you're talking about like a 20x difference in price. Well, whose job is it to take that in to that user story or that workload pattern? And so this is really the key of the second paper and coming into the third paper of the work group is this loop here. It's not static. It's only good for maybe 8 to 9 months. It's like produce. This is going to go bad. So if they're building this into the architecture, how do we manage the dynamics? Don't hard code stuff. So that's kind of the big graphic here in the paper that I wanted to share with you guys.
Great. I think that was really clear. Anything you'd like to ask Josh?
Sure. In reference to these GenAI API platforms, when I say that, this is your AWS Bedrock, Azure AI Studio. You have those two capacity types to choose from. Shared capacity, you pay for only for what you use, and you have provision capacity where it's you're paying up front for this capacity. It's for a fixed amount of throughput, and it isn't scalable, right? So if you were to run everything on dedicated capacity, you're going to have a very highly performant application, but it's going to be more expensive. That's running it like a data center. But you can create, with engineering's help, chaining logic between the two capacity types to say, okay, if this request can't be served by dedicated capacity, automatically retry on shared capacity. And by doing that and having a tolerance to say, okay, on shared capacity, it's, we're okay with 10, 15% of requests at peak times actually hitting that. Yeah, they're going to have a little increase in latency because that's the nature of shared capacity, but you will actually, because you're using a blend, have your cost per token is going to be less than the on-demand rates even. So the numbers I ran, we're looking at, if you're just flexible with it, 15% less than on-demand. And then if you're actually just trying to use dedicated capacity for rate optimization, we're talking 33% less than on-demand. So we're talking 1 year RI and savings plan rates at that point. So with a little engineering's help, you can actually blend those two things. But again, keeping in mind that this can impact the performance of the application. So it takes a lot of, again, collaboration between you and engineering to make sure that's the right decision.
And I think that's why the FinOps practitioner will really fit in nicely into leading this conversation with the business, right? Being able to have the open and honest conversation with the business saying, hey, is this type of performance worth it for this particular use case, right? That's the sort of conversation we've always been having, right? Whether it's a database that could, run 1 million transactions per second. Do you need that database to actually run 1 million transactions per second? Or can you get away with something that's not quite as performant, right? It's the same exact conversation. It's just with the fancy new, buzzwords. So again, FinOps is in a really good position to help lead the charge in this world because, again, we have the framework to help us communicate effectively both with the business and then also with engineers, right? We're all talking the same language and we're all making the change. So it's really exciting.
Great. And just sticking with the optimization type tactics and themes, something that came up in the sessions as well was around prompt engineering. Certainly a new concept for me. Do you want to share a little bit more about what that is and how the practitioners can participate?
Yeah, it's a great topic. So in the graphic here where it says the user request of API, because it's kind of what we call conversational, they're very terse. And so what's going on now behind the scenes is what we call prompt rewriters. And so we're trying to get a semantically better thing of saying, I understand the intent, or because of our last 5 chats we've had, I understand more context. And so a semantic prompt rewriter can go into a template. And so because we have a user story, you can now get very specific in the purpose, the persona, the content, the guardrails for it. And then here's the thing to act as. So you tell the AI to act as a FinOps data visualization analyst. And so when you're giving that context in to the prompt, there's a reason people are saying, hey, if you do basic prompting on a last year's version, why can I get a better answer on that than you can on the brand new, most expensive version? And because of prompt engineering techniques, if you were aware of those, you can get just as good or better on that, which costs 10 times less. And so now what we've done is we've automated that. And so whether it's you telling a bot or an agent, hey, you're a customer support Slack bot, there's a template. And so as your AI teams are building these things out, they're going to have prompt templates. Or if you're trying to build your own, you should definitely invest in those skills. And there's some prompting guides and resources online. But the whole goal there is that the better context you have, the better the AI will relate and give you a better answer.
Great, thank you. Okay, so thinking about our day-to-day as FinOps practitioners, there are numerous practices and processes that we think and discuss that AI could help or help us support and do. Quite a few of these came up yesterday. Can we share a few with the audience today and where we think AI could support us in our normal day-to-day FinOps capabilities?
Sure. Yeah. So I kind of mentioned it earlier, right? So AI for FinOps is kind of what we're talking about, right? As the best way to kind of think about it is, what is the nitty-gritty work that you don't necessarily enjoy about FinOps, right? Is it crafting that email to 100 or 1,000 application teams, asking them to update to, a Graviton instance, or is it kind of working through generating charts like we were talking about earlier, right? There's these sorts of capabilities that take a lot of time, but they have a big payoff, right? And that's the promise of AI, right? There's this spectrum of tasks that on the far side on one end is your traditional engineering capabilities, software that's very deterministic. And then on the other side is the sort of human touch, very difficult to kind of put into logic. And there's always been this sort of gray area that's been in between those two areas. And being able to push that boundary into the human side of it will pay off really well, because you're able to do more with less. And so I don't think do we have the actual examples from yesterday? I can pull up the ones on the phone. I don't think so.
Let's go to your notes. They're not.
Okay, yeah, sorry. A really good one that we were talking about was when you're talking to an application owner who they know that their app is in the cloud, but they may not know exactly what an EC2 instance is, for example. If you go and tell them, hey, your EC2 instance is an M4X12 large, it needs to be an M5X16 to better perform. That doesn't mean anything necessarily to them, right? And so if you can use AI to take that recommendation that one of the vendors is giving, or maybe even one of the cloud providers is giving, you're going to be able to translate that into something that's more understandable or more relatable. And by being more relatable, you're going to become more likely to actually have them implement that change, right? And that's what we want. We want the app owners to actually make the change that helps their app perform better and the business perform better as well.
I mean, how many people in here have to dig through anomaly detection emails and budget alerts, like dozens of those a week probably, right? So again, AI could read through those and help you identify, trends, themes, and ways to actually get that out to the engineering teams much more efficiently. Also add, when communicating with engineers and leadership, use Grammarly. That would help too. But yeah.
Yeah, so some of the things I'm using or excited about using, some of it's personal, just playground. I've been trying to play with it for 2 years. The other one is things that, like finance and FP&A, things they won't do or can't do due to scale or boredom, or they've got too many other things to do, like automated SKU analysis. So every day, all these SKUs come in with charges. Was it undercharged or overcharged versus the contract rate we thought we were going to expect? Another one is spend anomalies, but spend anomalies, we've been able to do that with ML for decades before AI came. The cool thing is when the anomaly comes up, it automatically builds a chart with a deep link dashboard, so they can pivot all the way into the SKU for quantity and dollars and stuff. But then the generative AI says, here's what I think caused it. The Gen AI says, here's what I think you should do to fix it based on what you've done before to fix it. And so you're blending machine learning with data visualization, with Gen AI cause, with Gen AI solutions, right? And so I think that's one of the more advanced use cases that we're enabling. The last one is what I call like a leadership AI. A lot of the times, just because I've been doing this for like 12 years, how would I leave behind all the stuff we've built, right? So I've got a question. I've never been to run phase in forecasting. I'm at walk phase, but if I could ask an AI, hey, how do I get to run phase in forecasting as a FinOps core team member? Or how do I do a cost per unit of work unit economic, right? So I'm trying to build this AI that would grab some of the FinOps org community content and you could ask it, and it could run locally on your laptop or your phone. And so that way, instead of you guys trying to ask the Slack channel, right, and we don't have enough time to respond, but how would we have an AI for all of you to take everything you've heard this week, and then when you need it, ad hoc, ask a question, right, and it gives you a really good answer. So those are some of the things that I'm really trying to look forward to or build and give back to the community.
Right, some great options there. Do you want to add another?
I was just going to say the idea of composite AI, where you're taking the traditional machine learning endpoint, where there's an inference coming from a defined data set, binary classification, for example, and then taking that output and combining it with generative AI is looking extremely promising for kind of unleashing. We were talking about you don't expect a fish to climb a tree, right? But if you can equip generative AI with these more traditional machine learning capabilities, it does start to look like the fish is going to be able to climb the tree. It may not be exactly how we would climb a tree, but it'll get up there. So it's exciting.
Yep, very exciting. Okay, so thank you all for answering the questions. I'd like to open it up to the floor, and anyone here who'd like to ask the panel question, please put your hand up and we'll share a mic with you.
Wonderful. And while I walk over there, little primer round of applause for our panel here. This is a catch box. I'll throw it and you catch it unless you're close. Oh, let's do it.
Thank you. We are a bigger consumer now in Bedrock platform AI, and we have a third-party modules that we are consuming from Anthropic Cloud. And the confusion we have some fleet price and we have some commitments to save money in the generative AI world on top of AWS. It's worth having the tips and tricks how we can save money in the third-party AI models in the Bedrock service.
Yeah, so are you looking for data analysis to score and evaluate alternative options? Is that what you're looking for?
Yeah, I think the pricing is based on the tokens APIs are exchanging. So we have two different prices available from Anthropic Claudio, but we are not in a position to decide how to commit then. In the world of RISP, at least we know how much we should reserve the instances compared to on-demand. But in the world of Anthropic Claudio, we don't know how to commit. When to go with the commitment, when to go with the fleet price. So
yeah, no, it depends how you're
and it almost have a
scoping
50% of discounts available, but when to leverage them, we just need the tips for that.
Yeah, I'd say it's a scoping thing. In the level of scoping, each workload can have its own user story, especially if it's a big production scale workload, versus we're trying to do a financial forecast for a roll-up. And then if you're doing centralized purchasing and planning and spend commits, and then, as Josh mentioned, is it a capacity issue, right? So if you know you're going to run into it, if you're largely migrating and the trend is to go up, and if you overbuy by overcommitting, then maybe 1 month you're only overbought, right? So if you're in a stable environment and you overbuy, that's bad or declining. But if you're in a growth environment, it's okay to commit forward a little bit, and then that way you're assured capacity as they spin up. Maybe you're only doing that monthly. So yeah, it kind of comes back to the rounding error, right? How much money should the business be spending in the first place? Are we spending enough, right? And then if we come back as FinOps, if you're only a month ahead purchasing, that's better than being a month behind.
If I'm understanding the question, it's about how to choose which capacity to go with, right? So does the application need low consistent latency? If so, then shared capacity is not going to have low consistent latency. It's shared with other customers at peak hours of the day. You may see 5+ seconds of increase in latency. So if it does require that, then you probably need to look at provision capacity and maybe the shortest commitment you can do for that just to get a feel for it. And then another consideration is the application priority. Is it a highly visible, Is it customer facing? All those things probably means it needs to be performant. What kind of usage is it? Is it batch processing? Is it running in the background? So even if it's slow, it's not going to be noticeable to the user. Also, do you already have commitments? What is your current token volume? Can you lump some of these production services together to where a commitment does make sense? And then on top of that, coming back to what I mentioned before around chaining to shared capacity as a way to kind of keep those costs down so you don't have to deal with such low utilization of the provision capacity and you can commit to less.
Yeah, I think just in general, right, as these models are becoming more mature and the offering is becoming more mature, we're going to see kind of the pricing also mature, right? And so I think even recently, batch pricing has come out being like, half as expensive as on demand. So if there are, not everything has to be a chatbot in generative AI, right? And so if there's any sort of way where you can offload whatever you're doing into a batch process, I think you'll see a lot of gain in the value from each individual invocation. So I would generally push you towards that. You'll do well.
Catch.
I was going to spike it, but so one of the challenges that we're running into is the availability of the cleanliness of the data before we even get to the model, and the exorbitant costs in doing so really killing the business case before we even get off the ground. Is that something that we're considering in this, and what do we do? Like, how do we get this under control?
Yeah, so most of that, let me know, is it like unstructured content from like documents? Mm-hmm. Okay, so part of the problem, prior life I was at Box, and one of the things we saw early on was the ability to extract items out of like PDFs or not PDF doc in CSV. Like everyone's got that. And before like Llama Index Parser just recently got updated, luckily that just got updated, right? So for the last, before a couple months ago, before that came out, it was really hard. And so it depended on the abilities to pull it off correctly and get it in. And then auto metadata applications, right? And so that was another key feature of some of these content management systems. So when I said earlier, look to your BI tool to add AI, similar, look to your content file stores. They're going to add AI in the metadata, and they'll clean it. So some of us are trying to get JSON, right? We don't want the text. We want JSON. Right. Then we can do all these other cool functions and calls and other stuff. So look at that, and that should help you. The new Llama parser is really good. So maybe make sure they're using that, but maybe look at your content management system and have it run it through there to at least do the parsing, and then make sure you don't pay twice. Right?
That's
like,
exactly what
don't have a
business
content
case,
management
right?
system.
Yeah.
If you're already paying and they're already doing it for you, send them to their UI. Don't build another one, right? Because now you're billing twice.
And I think just generally, right, this is a really new field, and everyone is expecting it to be the silver bullet that can do everything, right? And so, but it's not. Right? It's still just a fancy, fancy array of numbers figuring things out for us. So just because your use case today, it can't necessarily logic its way through it and extract the text properly and do whatever it needs to do, doesn't mean that the models of tomorrow won't be able to do it. So keep the ideas on the back burner. Just because it didn't work out with ChatGPT 3.5 today doesn't mean it won't work with 4.0 tomorrow, right? So keep that in mind, and obviously with the newer models, they'll be a little bit more expensive, but if you can actually do these things, right, that's that sort of...
There's an offset.
Right, exactly. That's something that nobody else is able to do yet, and so now you're able to do it, and that'll give you that edge.
Okay, thank you.
I ask a secondary question to that?
Sure.
Markdown language is in my structure comment.
Did we wait for the question to be asked real quick?
I wanted to follow up to your question.
Vic, pass.
Yeah, two-part.
You can only ask one question because there's 3 people in front of you.
I know. So, I apologize, my voice is gone. But would Markdown language help with that unstructured data so that we could query it better? And okay, Thank you.
Yeah, generally, if you can insert any sort of structure into whatever it is that you're giving to generative AI, right, it will perform better. And that's just because of how the models have been trained. They've been trained on this sort of data that has some semblance of structure. It's not fully structured, but it's that context that gives it the power to be able to perform. So.
No, it was great insights and discussion, and I like the chalk talk you had yesterday also, so that's awesome. So my question is about, and hopefully it'll be easier for you folks, is that when you're doing shared models, right, for AI, how do you expect the cost allocations for them to the right teams for the shared AI models?
Yeah, no, it's a good point. We're still trying to figure that out. So some of it is deploying into their own projects. So anything that they do through their own project, that is a cloud architecture decision. So the other one is if you're a tenant and you're coming in through like an ML platform type company, then they own the tagging and the labeling. Some of it is multiple API keys. So you'll get a different API key based on the provider and the business unit or the cost center. The other one is we're starting to get into like trace headers and VPC IDs and other things. So where is it originating from? So trying to blend some of the other source metadata IP addresses with VPCs, because a lot of it is what we call untaggable, right? So it's like those untaggable SKUs or shared foundation services, or is it more like a BigQuery job? And so now you got to go into the job and get a job ID, and then you got to split the cost on the total of the all job IDs. So it's still kind of surfacing, and it really depends on, like, is it like for us, is it a Gemini interaction from that project? That one's pretty easy. But if it's a shared open source model of a multi-tenant thing, then we're trying to come up with better ideas. So I'm not going to say it's solved right now, but those are some of the ideas I think I've heard of what might work.
Yeah, and something we do at Grammarly is we have a LLM proxy, and it's primarily used for what's hitting the GenAI APIs right now. But down the line, we'd like to also include what we're hosting on our old infra as well. But that breaks it down by calling service. And especially when you're using provision capacity, really the only way to allocate that is, okay, how much of all the tokens were consumed by this service and allocate it from a percentage standpoint. And with reserve capacity, I really don't know another way to do that. But yeah, it's still a lot to figure out. But the proxy for us made a huge difference.
And I would say that there's a lot of technologies out there that have kind of solved this sort of problem before, right? And we're lucky in that a lot of the large language models return the token usage after each invocation. And so it's not fun, but at the end of the day, you can look at your monthly bill and then look at the total number of tokens consumed. If you're tracking that, I would recommend tracking that. And if you associate the number of tokens that you send and consume, you can just do a roll-up at the end of the day and basically split up the cost. It doesn't have to be fancy. It doesn't have to be some grand UI. It can live in a spreadsheet, especially right now, right? When this thing is moving so quickly and changing so rapidly. If you do build a big technology solution, be prepared for you to have to change it a lot, next month, right? So I would say keep things simple, keep track of the tokens that you're using, keep track of who generated those tokens with like unique identifiers. And then if someone's really going off the rails, then at least know who to email.
The only thing I'll add there is these are newer services. These services have been out just over a year. The billing data is not great. Some consider these PTUs or these capacity units as model agnostic in billing, yet you have to buy them for a specific model. Right. So good luck trying to allocate all of that. So there's going to be some maturity there, and it's going to be some help. But I'm in spreadsheets too, allocating this stuff right now because that's all we have.
And I think if you are having a hard time, talk to your account executive, right? Like the only way that we get better visibility into the pricing is by making a lot of noise and complaining a lot. And so when we all kind of pitch together, right, we can basically have them build what we need in order to accurately start forecasting and understanding what these applications actually cost.
That's a hope, right?
Thank you. From your experience, how are you quantifying the value of the GenAI spend?
Yeah, yeah, so a couple different ways. One of them is like time to achieve. So the Code Copilot one of like SQL to GQL, it was going to take like 2.5, 3 years, and now it will only take 9 months. So there's a time to value of developer versus other projects. And then there's what we call like double bubble. So we would reduce the amount of double environment spend. And then another one is like on the business side, like time to value or stickiness or average order increase or repeat order or net promoter score. And so there's various value metrics that we try to use internally at FinOps. The ones we're really measured on are like department forecast accuracy. And then finance is measured on budget surprise or budget variance. The other unit metric is the cost per unit of work. So to deliver that much work, let's say it's 1 million page views or 1,000 TPS, or what's the cost per 50,000 CPU core hour block, right? And so we have all these different metrics depending on what department we're trying to agree to. So each department has a relevant like cloud metric. And so those are the things that it's important for FinOps to ask, what's the management outcome, right? What kind of FinOps data do I have with your work or quantity or value metric so that we can make sure we're delivering, and 6 months later, how did we do and how are we trending? So I spend a lot of time really asking, if you had one metric, how do you know if you're busy or not today? And then I divide that by their cost. And that seems to be the best one to start with. So.
Amazing. I know there are more questions, but there's more conference left. Take the conversation out to the conference, and let's thank the panel one more time.
Thanks for watching. Check out more FinOps X 2024 content on our YouTube channel on the 2024 playlist. Support our channel by liking, subscribing, clicking the notification bell, and by leaving comments and questions for our speakers. We appreciate your support.